everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are here to discuss everything about careers in UX and what UX comprises about. So, as we all know, user experience design has been one of the most budding and most promising fields. And for the same, we invited Divya. Divya happens to be a senior design lead at IDEO. She has a very interesting journey, right from Nokia to IDEO and from India to the Silicon Valley. And Divya today will explain her experience about as a user experience designer, and also about what should you do to start up your career as a UX designer. So about Divya, she's a senior design lead at IDEO, and I think that explains it all. And more than that, I'll leave it to her if she would like to add a couple of things, and she'll also introduce herself. But for now, stay tuned. Throughout the webinar, you can see a chat option which appears on the right side of your screen. You can type your questions there. At the end of the session, for the last 20 minutes, we will have a live Q&A with Divya. And just drop your questions there. I will take those questions and discuss them with Divya, and we'll get answers from Divya. So that's about it. Over to you, Divya. You can take over the session now. Yeah. So Divya, I'll intervene for a moment. I think we are unable to hear you. If you could just, yeah. No. Yeah. So Divya, yeah, we can't hear you right now. So just give us a minute. Divya is coming live again. Yeah. Give me your headphones. Give me your headphones.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, okay.
Yeah, I think we can resume. Sorry for the glitches, guys, and yeah, we'll just go on.
So this is why you need user experience designers. So, this user experience can be improved. So thanks, Shreya, for introducing me. Just to tell you a little bit about myself, I've been a user researcher and user experience designer for the past 11 years with Nokia and more recently with IDEO. I graduated as a communication designer from Srishti School of Art, Design and Technology in Bangalore. So my background is in design, but I moved into more of the technology sector, trying to understand how the aspects of design and understanding users and designing for people could really be applied to mobile technologies of the future. So I worked at Nokia Research Center for 4 years. To IDEO, IDEO's Mumbai office, then IDEO's Singapore office, and more recently, as Shreya mentioned, to IDEO's San Francisco location. So I would love to I hope to answer any questions you have about user experience design and the kind of the broad universe that it encompasses, but also the fact that there's a lot of kind of confusing terminologies and confusing career definitions in that space. So I hope to clarify some of that. I'll move to sharing my talk. Can you see me okay? Okay, I'm hoping that you can all see the screen quite clearly. So yeah, as Shreya mentioned, I'll be talking a little bit about careers in user experience design. But before I start, I want to share an analogy that I feel really best explains this kind of sphere or this area of design. So I don't know how many of you have seen this phenomenon. It happens everywhere around the world where there's usually something that's, man-made and constructed, usually beautifully laid out like this, circular path over here. But the way people behave is fundamentally just opposite to that behavior. So the fact that they just cut across this circular path and take the shortest route is something that is genuine human behavior. And how do we respond to some of these things? This phenomenon, and it's actually a known phenomenon, is called a desire path. And a desire path usually represents the shortest or most easily navigated route between the origin and destination. And having seen this phenomenon for years and years, it became really interesting to me that places like universities across the world started to not make formalized paths or not design formalized roads and structures in between buildings. What they did was they started to just build their campuses and see how students naturally move across them. Then take kind of aerial photography like this picture here, which I think is a University of Michigan, and then construct actual paths based on students' natural behavior. And I found this really interesting. And this for me is kind of the approach to user experience design, which is understand what behaviors people have and then build on those behaviors to create designed products, services, experiences, or systems. So I feel like this is a really great analogy for user experience design. So the one point that I find I always have to make when it comes to user experience design is that typically we talk a lot about users or customers or consumers, and we always tend to refer to these people in this way that feels very kind of distant, like they're basically people who buy your product or use your product. You don't see them sometimes as just people. And I feel that it's really important for us to have a focus on seeing them as people with lives and children and hopes and dreams, and starting from that point and not just thinking of them in that one narrow viewpoint of being, a customer of the product that you have, because it might be that some behavior in some other part of their life will influence how they use your product. So it's really important to kind of have that holistic view of who you're designing for. And that really is the core value of user-centered design. We at IDEO and we in the design world use this framework a lot, which is kind of the intersection of three things. So we have desirability, which is what people want. We have feasibility, which is how is this product or service actually going to be successful, make profit, make us money, and viability. That's viability, and feasibility is how is it actually technologically feasible? Like how can we make something that exists with the technology that we have? And interestingly enough, in the intersection of those three things is where innovation happens. So when you see really successful, apps or services, it's like Uber, for example. Uber is designed to meet people's needs of having easy access to transport anytime, anywhere. The fact that it's a commercially successful business, and the fact that it doesn't employ drivers, it has a business model that actually looks at them as contractors, and its feasibility in terms of the technology platform is something that comes together to make a really truly radical innovation in that product. But what is more important is that when it comes to user-centered design or human-centered design, this is where we start. The starting point is often not to say that, I have a cool technology and how do I make money from it, but it's actually to say, what do people need and how can I better address that need? So when you start at desirability, that's when you actually start to have real human-centered design. And that's something that's really important, to really kind of have this notion of building products and services that are responding to people's needs and responding to people's actual behaviors. For me, human-centered design and user experience design are kind of interchangeable. Different parts of the industry refer to them in different ways, but the fundamental skill sets that are needed for both to succeed are pretty much the same. So if you see, a job kind of posting that says a user experience design versus one that says human-centered design, typically they're asking you to do similar things. It's just that you will see more of user experience design in the technology realm and human-centered design in more design studio industry kind of spaces. So that's one of the big differences. Now, when it comes to user interface and user experience, there starts to be a little more difference. So user interface is typically the means by which the user and the computer system or any kind of system interact in the particular use of input devices. So it's typically, the screen of your phone, it is the screen of the ATM service that you use, it's the screen of your smart TV, and the user interface is typically that kind of that layer that lies between people and the systems that they're using. Whereas user experiences encompasses all aspects of the end user's interaction with the entire company's, services, products, everything that they do. So to kind of put it in a way that's a little simpler, user interface is typically focusing on how something looks, and user experience focuses on how something feels and how that entire experience feels like to a user. Going back to kind of the analogy of Uber, the user interface is the screen of the app, and what buttons might be where, exactly how you navigate from one screen to another. Whereas his user experience is everything from how you're onboarding, how you discover the app, to how you use it, how you get rewarded over time, how you kind of see different parts of the app to kind of change the settings, what kind of feedback you get once you use the app, and what is the long-term kind of trajectory of a user over time. So all of that is where user experience differs from user interface typically. One way in which it is seen typically is that UI design becomes a part of user experience, that user experience designers have UI skills or UI design skills that allow them to kind of make a concept or an idea visual and tangible. But user experience also has all these other kind of parts to it. So it has understanding content strategy. It has the aspect of doing user research, going out into the field, speaking and interviewing people, and understanding, as I mentioned, their lives and their behaviors to see what aspects you might want to design for. And it also has the aspect of prototyping. And here I'm just kind of simplifying this because user experience has like 10 more things as part of it. But I would say these four are kind of key parts of user experience that typically are the skill sets that are looked for when for hiring for a position. And the difference is that while I would say UX is more broad in terms of the skill sets, like it's looking for a variety of skills, UI is more deep. So it's looking for a depth of craft in one particular aspect of user experience design. And so I definitely think there are huge valid job opportunities both in UI and UX, but they just look slightly different. So if you're the kind of person who likes to kind of see the entire process through, then UX is perhaps where you want to make your bet. But if you're somebody who is very detail oriented, has a deep appreciation for technology, and to focus on one aspect of that user experience, then UI can be very enriching as well. And just to talk a little bit more about user interface as well, There's so many new emerging aspects of user interface design that feel really ripe for new design kind of energy and new design minds to be part of it. And these are four of them that I'll just really quickly walk you through. So one of them is this aspect of designing conversations. So more and more you'll see in the world a lot more chatbots, kind of real life in conversations, or feeling like they're real but automated on the back end, with artificial intelligence, that really feel like they're coming more and more into our daily lives. Examples you'll see when Facebook released their chatbot, a lot of services like food delivery services, or your local hairdresser, or your taxi service, all these started to move to a chatbot, and these are called almost like conversation interfaces. So you'll see a lot of chatbots and voice interfaces even kind of really trying to understand the structure of the conversation, designing for anticipation of users. If they say this, what do you have to respond with? What does human natural language sound like? So that's one really big aspect that's gaining a lot of traction in the technology world, and especially here in Silicon Valley and in many other parts of the world. The second aspect of UI design that I feel is getting a lot of attention and focus is designing augmented reality interfaces. So this is typically I see a lot of application for this in the retail sector, but I feel that there is potential for it to cross over to some other sectors like healthcare, especially, and education. So this is kind of the aspect of where your screen or your device helps you add a layer of information that you previously didn't have in the real world. So there's a lot of great apps that basically you can walk around the store, and the minute you hold up your phone in front of the objects that are there, it pops out new information. So say you can say the price tags or the companies or the history of that product, all with this added layer of your personal device. The third one that's really picking up, and recently, I just saw kind of a really amazing live demo of a gaming interface, but I feel like it's moving towards some of the other aspects as well, is virtual reality. So really kind of adding a layer of information with specialized devices like 3D goggles. The fact that Google made a simple downloadable cardboard device that you can even make your phone into a virtual reality device means that there is commercial kind of use coming just around the corner, and there are designers required to create very specialized customized interfaces for such experiences. So that's something that's really promising as well. And the last one is designing tangible interaction. So looking at kind of the combination of digital and physical and creating interaction opportunities, especially in the education sector. This is becoming really popular, where companies are creating games that allow kids to have a physical puzzle piece, interact with their iPad, and kind of go back and forth between those two interfaces. So this is again a new other aspect of UI design that's really gaining a lot of attention. So I do believe that if you are the kind of person who is kind of really passionate about going deep into a certain aspect of the craft, there are so many opportunities in UI design that are emerging that feel like they really lack expertise. So or they would benefit from a lot of specialized designers, and that's one aspect that you could definitely go into. Think about user experience design or human-centered design as being like almost like the what, like you're designing for, like what you're working on. Then the design thinking process becomes the how, or the method by which you do or implement user experience design. So I wanted to also take you through a little bit of that design thinking process in very broad strokes, so you understand what it might mean to work every day as a user experience designer. So the design thinking process was something that was created about 35 or 40 years ago. Companies like IDEO started using them very early on to create products like the first Apple mouse, the first Palm Pilot. But then we started moving from using the process to not only create physical products, but also digital products and experiences in the world. And the process pretty much over 40 years of it may existing still pretty much looks the same, and that's because it works. So the four broad steps to the design thinking process are: you start with research, you move on to synthesis, you do design, and you prototype. I'll take you through all these four steps in a little bit of detail. So research is typically understanding the needs and context of the people. And we talked a little bit about that. So how do you kind of really understand the needs and behaviors of people as they are so that you can design for them? Synthesis is a slightly more ambiguous step. It's like a little less clear and structured. It doesn't have as many rules. But the point of synthesis is to make sense of the data collected in research, to have clear insights and define clear opportunities. So if you find something in the user's home that you feel that, oh, they are more likely to use these kind of devices, then that would go into your insight and into your product development directions. Design is something, is the aspect of the process where you actually brainstorm ideas and solutions and address the needs that came out of research and synthesis. So that is when you actually take an opportunity area that you find in synthesis and say, so if this is an opportunity, what are all the ways in which we can make that, answer that question? And it's about going broad and coming up with as many ideas as possible, and then narrowing it down to the fourth phase, which is actually taking some of those ideas and prototyping them with people again. And this is the idea of what we call building to think. So not thinking by, writing or sketching, but thinking by making something and putting it back in front of people so that they can respond to it and you can get authentic feedback from them. So this aspect of the process is really interesting for us, because once you finish prototyping, you pretty much take a full cycle and go back into research and then start again. So there's kind of this idea of iterating on the process a few times before you arrive at the solution. So the design thinking process typically doesn't start by saying, I have a great idea. It starts with a hypothesis saying, I think I have an idea, but I need to understand more about how people use it. I need to then think of solutions and then prototype something and go back to people and check with them. So this process of kind of this loop of iteration becomes really important. One other kind of framework that we like to use that's pretty valuable for the design thinking process is this idea of converging and diverging. And what I mean by that is that when we start with a design challenge. So, we want to design the latest new phone for Apple. And then you go into research and you learn so much about people. So you go really broad, and then you have to, in synthesis, come back again, go narrow, and make a decision about these are the few things from my research that I feel are good opportunities. Once you define those opportunities, you go broad again into the ideation phase and you're diverging, creating lots of ideas. And then in the prototyping phase, you're going to come back. So you're going to converge again and have a few ideas that you prototype, and similar, and so on and so on. So this idea of going broad and then going back narrow is very important to the design thinking process, and to do it kind of continuously. I'd like to share a quick case study with you that might help bring some clarity to this abstract thing that I've been talking about. So PillPack was a company that was a startup in Boston, and they really wanted to focus on changing the experience of the pharmacy for people who needed pills. So they really looked at what is a new way in which a pharmaceutical service can interact with a person. So typically how it works, especially in America, is that you go to a doctor, You get prescribed some pills. You have to then take that prescription, go to the pharmacy. The pharmacy has to kind of fill out that prescription and give you all the drugs that are required. And then every time you need those drugs get over, you have to go back to the doctor, get the thing filled out, go back to the pharmacy, collect your prescription. And so it's a really tedious, complicated process. And especially for a lot of older people who have trouble kind of, getting out of the house or making all these various trips, it becomes a real burden or a bottleneck in actually taking their pills. So PillPack was aiming to solve that problem of the pharmacy by creating this very unique solution. And this was something that we worked on at IDEO Boston. And you can see more about it online as well. So before I go any more into it, I'd love to show you a little video. So I hope you could all see that clearly. The reason I wanted to share that case study with you was really to show you a breakdown, the process by which they got to that final solution. When PillPack came to us, they had a very basic product. They didn't have a digital interface or product to go with it, and they hadn't fully resolved many of the aspects of the process for the user, like what happens, how are they going to actually get their medication, how do they make sure that the right medication is there, how do they ensure that they take the right dosage of every medicine, and there were a lot of kind of questions that were still open. When we started the process, we started with the research phase. And if you go to the PillPack website, you can see a lot of stories of people who were actually first interviewed and then later became PillPack users as well. And these are the people who actually gave us deep insight into really understanding how or what are the specific behaviors that we need to design for. And to ensure that we got a good understanding of the wide range of users, we did what was called kind of extreme research. So we spoke to parents with young kids who needed medication, much older people who were living on their own, people who had chronic disease like diabetes and needed to take kind of daily medication to keep up their health, people who were kind of long-term users of a certain drug and needed to be reminded. So there were like a huge range of people that we spoke to kind of understand what are the needs. So we design for everyone. When you design typically for the extremes, you're designing for everyone in the middle or in between as well. So that was really important to kind of really get into understanding some of the human behaviors before we could get into the actual design of the product. The next phase, as I mentioned this earlier, was the synthesis phase. So in the synthesis phase, we really focused on taking some of those the insights from the research and creating a journey map. And this is a huge pivotal part of the user experience design process, where you actually plot what is the entire experience of that user over time. So how do they kind of get introduced to the service? How do they have learning or awareness about the service so that they know exactly what it does? How do you onboard somebody onto that service? And that is a point typically that you lose a lot of people if they're not onboarded well. I can't tell you the number of apps that I've used where just the sign up process puts me off and I never use it again. So how do you actually bring people on in a way that feels natural, and engaging to them? And then there's the everyday usage, which is like, what does it feel like to use this product or service every day? And then there's the kind of the long-term kind of need of like maintenance. How do we actually ensure people keep using this service, or keep them continuously, have something to look forward to, or give them real added value so that this is their preferred choice when it comes to pharmaceutical services? So the synthesis really allows us to bring that story of everything that we heard in the research phase to life and have specific questions that drive design. So specific questions for each of those different phases of the process. The third phase is the actual design phase, and this is when you might design all the different parts of the system. So you might say that a service, especially as complex as PillPack, has many aspects to it. You have a physical, a physical product, which is the product that dispenses the medicine. So that's something that sits in your house. You have the actual design of the packet of medicine itself, which tells you what pills you're going to take every day. It has information like the date and the time. You have the mailing service, the package in which the box arrives. So what additional information do you need to give people? And then you have the digital side, which is what is the apps or service that supports this physical product experience. So in case of PillPack, there was a mobile app that worked on your phone or your iPad or any kind of handheld device, and you also had a website for people who did not have any of those devices. So you had kind of a range of entry points of access for a range of people and their different needs. And on the app, you could kind of, as you saw in the video, very simply put your name, put your your medical details and your doctor, and it would directly on the back end connect the doctor's office to the pharmaceutical PillPack service, so that they could supply you with the right drugs at the right time. And that backend became very critical, and it's typically something that you don't see as a user, but part of being a user experience designer is also looking at what's invisible to the user and designing a really great system for that as well. So the last part of the process was actually the most exciting, when we actually created a prototype. So there were many aspects of the prototype. We created test prototypes on Facebook where we tested different messaging and advertising directions for the PillPack service. So if you see on the left, there's one message that says, we pre-package all your pills so you never miss a dose, and tested another one that said, you deserve better, treat yourself to PillPack. So it kind of testing different angles of messaging just to see which ones would stick. And then we also created a fake kind of pharmaceutical store inside a mall to see how many people would sign up. So creating these low or high fidelity prototypes to actually test out some of your design questions and design hypotheses is really important before you invest, large sums of money to create something or invest in something really big. We believe it's really always the best to kind of test something out in a lighter way and then learn from that to create the product or service. So those 4 phases become really important when implementing the design or the user experience design process. Now, to break down for you what it might mean to be an actual designer on this project, these are the kind of roles that you might see. So the UX designer would be somebody that would be there throughout the process, and that's what I was mentioning. They have kind of a breadth of skills, so they may not be kind of very deep on each one of these, but they understand how to do all aspects of the process. Whereas a UI designer would be somebody that would be focusing more on the design and prototyping phases of the project, where they would be going deep into designing the app, designing everything from the look and feel of the app, the color palette, the font choices, but also what are the least number of steps in which this thing can be designed in. What are the mediums we should test our marketing campaign on? Should it be on Facebook? Should it be through email? And those are the kinds of decisions that the UI designer typically makes. So this is not to say that the UI designer does less, but it's just to say that they go deeper into fewer aspects, whereas the UX designer goes across and has breadth across the whole process. Now, when it comes to actually finding specific jobs or careers in these within this process, unfortunately, there's no norm of only user experience designer or UI designer. There's unfortunately so many terms that come up, and you might see this when you're looking through looking for jobs opportunities on websites. You'll see design researcher, user researcher, interaction designer, UI designer, product designer, systems designer, service designer, and they're all just different terms, but a lot of them mean smaller things. So anything that has the word researcher in it is looking for somebody who is proficient at the first two phases. It's not to say that they might not be there throughout the project, but that's where their real proficiency lies, to understand user insights, create kind of clear synthesis and insights and opportunities, and use those to drive the rest of the project. The service or system designer is almost synonymous to the UX designer, who is somebody who is there, has a breadth of skills across. And the interaction designer, UI designer, product designer, these are people who are typically on the second half of the spectrum, where they're focusing more deeper on designing the actual product. So if you see some of these terms, just remember that they're kind of synonymous to these terms over here. The last thing that I wanted to share before you should definitely ask me some questions are what are the skills that you will have or should have as a user experience designer, but more importantly, what are the mindsets that you should have when going into this space? And I believe that this is really important, because a lot of people sometimes come into these jobs from very different kind of worlds, and they find it really hard to kind of do things like working collaboratively, because they've worked alone all their lives. They worked as freelancers. So these are some skill sets that I believe would really kind of make you successful as a UI or a UX designer. So for the phase of research, typically it's the mindset of having empathy. So doing active listening, having a conversation with somebody, but not being the one always talking, sitting in a room and really being observative of like what is happening in that space. What are some of the cues in the environment that you can get? The synthesis phase really requires you to embrace ambiguity. And what that means is to be okay with not knowing everything or not knowing the answer. Sometimes I've seen people find it really hard to kind of embrace not being the expert, because this is a process in which you are starting from scratch every time. And while, of course, experience is really valuable and how many of projects you worked on in the past will inform your future work, you have to start every project saying that I'm going to learn from scratch and I'm going to trust the process. So embracing that unknown or ambiguity is really important. For the design phase, I really encourage people to have a bias to action. So not thinking about things or I think this is right or I think this is the right way to go, but actually making something. So a bias to actually getting down, designing something, putting it in front of people and testing it out, rather than just kind of hypothesizing in your head. And for the last phase, and this is, I think, one of the most important ones, is the mindset to embracing failure. Failure sounds like a bad word sometimes and usually looked down upon, but in the design universe or in the user experience universe, embracing failure is actually something that's really positive. It really allows people to say that I can create something, put it out there, and even if it doesn't work, I can take a lot of learning from that failure and make something better. And often cases, failure teaches you more than if something actually works, because it tells you very clearly what not to do. And I think having that mindset where it's okay to put something out there that's rough and raw and not ready, and have it not work in front of users, is actually really valuable. And to have the mindset to just say, that's okay, I now know I can't do that, is really to kind of take things forward. So that was all that I wanted to share with you. Thank you so much for all being here. I'm open to any questions that you have.
Yeah. So Divya, first of all, sorry.
No, I'm fine. Can you hear me?
Yeah. I can hear you. Give me one. Yeah. So Divya, thank you so much for all. And it was really. Can you hear voice?
I can hear you.
Yeah, you can hear the voice. Okay. So Divya, is how companies designers. And so if you could just let us know what in both maybe in terms of job role. Yeah, if you could just let us know that.
Yeah, sure. So you're asking how different companies recruit for UI and UX designers? Yes. So it really depends. I think the big difference comes when it's a design-based company versus a technology-based company. So technology-based companies usually recruit, or their job descriptions include things like more like UX or UI designers. Whereas in the design world, like in IDEO and many other design studios, you'll find that the job roles would have the word design in it. So it'll have human-centered design, design thinking, it'll have a design researcher. So it kind of pushes the aspect of design. It doesn't always mean you need to have a design education. It really helps sometimes, but it doesn't always specifically need that. But in the UX world, I've seen people who have come from a purely technology, computer science background, who have grown into being user experience designers because of the teams that they have been part of. So the skill sets are what are really important. So the fact that you have tried kind of interviewing users, you have incorporated that feedback into the product itself, you have been part of processes like agile, or the agile methodology is really human centered. So there's really kind of you look for those certain terms. At a company like Nokia, the recruiting process was pretty straightforward. So once you make an application, they usually they have a specific team in mind that they want to see you a fit for. So it's a very specific role to fill up. So there might be already one kind of technology expert, there might be one researcher, they might be a head of team, and they're looking for one user researcher to fill that gap. So they're looking for a very specific role. Whereas in design, the roles are a little more broader. So you might be part of a much larger team or studio, and they're just looking for additional expertise to bolster that team. So in technology, I feel that there's a lot more specificity of roles required, and in design, it's a little more open and unstructured.
Got you. Yeah. So another very insightful. Could you please just mute the speaker? Keeping the voices. Yeah, perfect. Yeah. So Divya, I think thank you so much for the information. And earlier also, I wanted to thank you for all the information in the presentation, because I think very clearly did it mention the different job roles and what each person is supposed to do. And it did explain the difference between researchers and actually full stack UX designers to UI designers, because there's a lot of confusion in the air when it comes to UI to UX. And when it comes to researchers, I mean, is research a subdomain of UX? Should a UX guy even bother to know about it, or is it essential? And there are a lot of queries again between, what's the boundary line between UI as well as UX. So it was very important to be clear. But on the interview question, which you just answered, we have one interesting question which one of our users is asking. And what they are saying is degree important while you hire people? You must have seen in Nokia as well as IDEO, and maybe in one company it is useful. I mean, degree is a prerequisite, and the other it's not. So, what are your views on, is degree a prerequisite, or self-taught, creative designers do have a scope? I mean, what are your views around this? If you take that question, I'll switch on the screen to you.
Sure. I believe there are kind of two views on that. There are companies that really look for those degrees and look for those become like the easy check marks for them to kind of filter through applications. And sometimes if they don't see a degree, nothing goes through. But I am of the personal belief that more than degree, portfolio is what is important. If you can show a quality set of work products that you have put out into the world that exist, that real people are using, you can show your depth of thinking through the process that you follow. You can show very clearly how your design has been taken from a real human need. I do believe that that is what is really valuable. A lot of more design-led companies look for that. Portfolio is the way to get your foot in the door. But a lot of the really big companies that go through external recruiters, for them, it's very hard to kind of look at portfolio because it means like qualitatively checking it. And the quantitative, tick of, degree is much easier for them. So unless you know somebody, it's typically harder to get into a very big company without the degree. But I would say there are a lot of amazing smaller startups that don't require that kind of process.
Got you. Thank you so much for that answer, because yes, I do see that there are a lot of self-taught professionals in the industry, and everyone does have questions around the same, that is degree a prerequisite? Would I be able to get in without a degree, or maybe not a degree, a proper professional course? Would that be a prerequisite? So yeah, I think that's a good point which you mentioned, that in some cases it just helps to filter the resume and give the person an edge at the resume shortlisting stage. And but there are startups who do recruit people with creativity and knowledge more of, and take it forward. So that brings me to my next question. One of the users have asked a very interesting question, which is, what are the similarities, or I'll put it in another way, do you think a product manager or maybe a project manager in an IT setup should know user experience, and why should they know user experience?
Great question. I'm so glad whoever asked that did, because I'm of the belief that undeniably a product manager or a project manager should not know user experience, but should design with users in mind. And it may not be that they know all the details of every step, but if they are not sitting in somebody's house who is a user and understanding how that person uses their service, then they're not designing the best possible product or service for that person. Because I do believe that the role of a product manager or a project manager is not only to manage the team, but to really ensure that the team is designing something that people will use. And so they should have a very clear kind of North Star of who is that user, what is their profile, what are the kinds of things that they are non-negotiables for them, and then use that kind of knowledge to drive the team internally. So I do believe that that's really important.
Got you. So I think, as you rightly said, the answer, actually our user has actually replied that thanks a lot for the answer. So I'll just take another question real quick. Let's say if someone is a UI designer and wants to make a transition to UX designer, what would be the key pointers which he should learn before, kind of applying for that job role, or, so that he is suitable for making that switch? And how big is that switch from a UI designer or a graphic designer to a UX designer? Yeah.
Great question. I think there was a point about, I would say, about 5 or 10 years ago, 5 to 7 years ago, where a lot of people were trained in UI design because there was no UX design being offered in the college kind of level. So a lot of people were actually trained as graphic designers or UI designers, interaction designers, but there was not as much, especially in the traditional colleges, not as much as UX focus. But that is shifting. So for people who do feel like they have that core kind of skill set of UI, I feel like they're in a great place to actually just pick up some of those other complementary skills that will transform them into a UX designer. There are a lot of online courses that are free and available, and also quite affordable, that help you kind of level up. You could also kind of do it on your own. There's a lot of free course material available online that you could just download and try things yourself. And it's basically picking up that aspect of how do I kind of bring that user back into the picture? How do I make sure that, I learn how to prototype? It's just some of those complementary aspects. So I do believe that there is a lot of material available that helps you do it on your own or with very little help. Doesn't mean that you have to kind of go into a graduate program or a postgraduate program to do it. There's a lot of kind of options available.
Got you, Divya. So we have another interesting question which has just come up. So in the we do see that there are a lot of freelancers, especially in the field of UI UX. So what are your views? How should a person kickstart as a freelancer, as a freelance UX designer, for example? And how difficult is that journey? I mean, what do you think? What's the scope?
Great question. I have a lot of friends who are actually freelance UX, UI, and UX designers. And as I mentioned earlier, I think what's really important is to put out a portfolio that really shows your depth of craft and your depth of experience. So even if you're just starting out, focus on telling a good story about what work you've done. So putting out, there are lots of great platforms on which you can build your own portfolios, put things out there that show, what kind of projects you worked on, what is the process that you followed, what kind of work you're interested to work on. And I would say take advantage of a lot of the startup camps, the startup weekends, the short kind of things that happen in and around your city, to interact with as many people as you can so that your name gets out there. Have influence across industries. There's also kind of opportunities to just send your portfolio to a lot of big companies who are looking for people for short-term projects, and make sure that you be very clear about what your skill set is and what it is not. Because unfortunately, while we all here might be clear about what is UI and what is UX, a lot of companies are still not clear. So I would say it's all, as a freelancer, it's really important to say that this is what I do and this is what I don't do, because sometimes you can be asked for things all across the board.
Got you, Divya. I think that was a fantastic answer. And yeah, I mean, freelancing is definitely a good option, and it does help in a lot of ways. But then building the freelance profile itself is definitely a challenge again, and definitely not a piece of cake. Yeah, I think thank you so much for all the insights which you have given. And I think we have covered up a lot of questions. If you guys have any additional questions, you can just send it across, and we will try and reply to your questions via an email, and we will also definitely pass them on to Divya. And whenever Divya is free, or she can make some time, we'll definitely revert back to your questions with them. But we'll just take one last question before we end the session. So one of our friends is asking, if I want to start a career as a UX designer, then what kind of courses should I consider? I mean, how long, or maybe what should they focus more on? Maybe application of principles, or what are the four broad topics which they should cover? So what are your views around it, Divya?
In terms of courses, I would say if you're looking to kind of take a break from whatever you're doing, there are a lot of like 1-year courses that are available both in India and abroad. So within some design universities, so within Mumbai, there's the Parsons School. There's Srishti has in Bangalore has a postgraduate course. NIB has a few. JJ School has. So there's a few kind of design colleges that offer UX or UI kind of short-term postgraduate courses, and that's for something official. If you can take off the time and you have willing to make the investment, that's kind of a more long-term thing. For short-term things, IDEO itself has a few kind of online opportunities. So there's IDEO U, which is IDEO's online university, which again comes at a bit of a cost, but there are some of those online ones. There's also there's a lot of available reading materials. So IDEO has something called the design kit, or the human-centered design kit for non-designers as well. So these are free tools that you can download online, but then it takes your personal perseverance to go through it. Or maybe ideally I would say find a friend, find somebody who's also keen on doing it, and pair up and do it together so that you can keep each other motivated. I believe that upGrad might be a place as well for you in the future to look towards some of those things. They already have a huge range of amazing courses available, and that kind of aspect would also be something that they would be looking at in the future. And it would also be a wise idea to maybe start finding interesting people in your city to apprentice with. So do an internship for like 2 to 4 months, try and get on a specific project, be very clear about what it is you want to learn. There's nothing like hands-on learning that will give you the most amount of experience. So those are some ways that you can get started.
Thanks a lot for the answers. I'll just add to it. Yes, as you said, you're right. upGrad would also soon launch a program on user experience or user research. And if you guys are keen, you can actually write to us, and we can definitely try to include your suggestions also as we develop the program. Yeah, I think that's pretty much all for the day and for the session. So I think thank you so much, Divya, for making it. It's 7 a.m. Your time, and starting at such early time definitely means a lot. And thank you so much for being with us, sharing your expertise and knowledge. Today is Women's Day, and we definitely would like to congratulate you for whatever you have achieved till date. And we hope you all the best for your future. Yeah, that's more about.
Thank you so much, Shreya. Yeah, happy Women's Day to all the women and men out there. Everyone should celebrate women today. Thank you so much, Shreya, for being such a wonderful host. And I'll hopefully see you all soon again sometime.
Thank you so much. Thank you guys for attending. Yeah, we hope to see you again. Yeah.